Harold and Margaret Whitman had weathered 43 years of marriage like seasoned sailors navigating familiar waters. Harold, 71, still possessed the steady hands of the aerospace engineer he'd been for 3 decades, while Margaret, 68, retained the sharp wit that had made her the most beloved teacher at Riverside Elementary. Their friends at the country club often remarked how they seemed to move in perfect synchronization, finishing each other's sentences and sharing knowing glances across crowded rooms. The anniversary cruise aboard the Celestial Dream was Margaret's idea. 43 years deserve something special, she declared, spreading glossy brochures across their kitchen table in suburban Phoenix. The 7-day Caribbean itinerary promised sunset dinners, ballroom dancing, and renewed romance under tropical stars. Harold had initially grumbled about the expense, but one look at Margaret's excitement dissolved his practical concerns. He booked the suite with the private balcony, complete with champagne service and ocean views that stretched to infinity. On the morning of departure from Fort Lauderdale, their daughter Rebecca captured them on her phone, laughing as Harold struggled with his new camera equipment. Margaret wore her favorite coral dress, the one that brought out the green in her eyes, while Harold sported the navy blazer she'd bought him for his retirement party. They looked like any other couple embarking on their golden year's greatest adventure, their matching luggage adorned with cheerful cruise tags promising 7 days of bliss. The Celestial Dream was everything the brochures promised and more. At 115,000 tons, she gleamed white against the Florida sunshine, her 15 decks bristling with pools, restaurants, and entertainment venues. Harold marveled at the engineering while Margaret delighted in the elegant decor of their suite on Deck 12. The private balcony offered an unobstructed view of the endless blue, complete with 2 cushioned chairs and a small table perfect for morning coffee. Their first evening began with the captain's welcome dinner, where they were seated with 3 other couples celebrating various milestones. Harold found himself deep in conversation with a retired NASA contractor about propulsion systems, while Margaret charmed everyone with stories from her teaching days. The ship's photographer captured them multiple times throughout the evening, Harold's arm around Margaret's shoulders during the champagne toast, both of them laughing at something their table-mate had said, Margaret's hand resting on Harold's as they gazed out at the star-filled sky. That night, as the ship sailed through calm seas toward their first port of call in Cozumel, the Whitmans stood on their balcony reviewing the day's photos on Harold's new digital camera. Margaret had convinced him to upgrade from his old film camera, though he still grumbled about all these buttons and menus. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction, its surface like black glass reflecting the ship's lights. Neither of them could have imagined that within 48 hours, those same waters would become their tomb. Tuesday dawned grey and choppy, with the ship rocking more noticeably than the previous days. Harold woke first, as was his habit, and stepped onto the balcony to check the weather. The sea had turned pewter-colored under overcast skies, and white caps dotted the surface as far as he could see. The ship's announcement system crackled to life. Due to rough weather, the planned excursion to Grand Cayman would be cancelled, and passengers were advised to remain in interior areas of the ship. Margaret joined him on the balcony with their morning coffee, her silk robe fluttering in the stiff breeze. Not exactly the tropical paradise they promised, she observed, but her tone remained cheerful. Harold was already fiddling with his camera, determined to capture the dramatic seascape despite the challenging conditions. The memory card was nearly full from their first 2 days of photography, sunset dinners, pool deck activities, formal portraits in the ship's atrium. Their last confirmed sighting came at 10:47 a.m., captured by security cameras as they walked hand-in-hand toward the elevator bank on Deck 12. Margaret carried a small purse and Harold his ever-present camera case. They appeared relaxed and unhurried, just another elderly couple making their way to whatever activity had caught their interest. The elevator doors closed behind them, and Harold and Margaret Whitman vanished from the recorded world forever. The silence began on a Tuesday, though it would be hours before anyone noticed. The Whitmans had no scheduled activities that afternoon, no dinner reservations until 7:30 at the French restaurant on Deck 5. Their absence from the afternoon trivia contest in the main lounge drew no attention. Many passengers had chosen to remain in their cabins due to the rough seas. Even their dinner companions assumed they were simply running late when their table remained empty at the appointed time. It was their cabin steward, Miguel, who first raised the alarm. During his evening turn-down service at 9 p.m., he found their suite exactly as he'd left it that morning, beds made, towels unchanged, the balcony door slightly ajar despite the continuing rough weather. The Do Not Disturb sign had never been placed on the door, and Margaret's reading glasses lay folded on the nightstand beside a half-finished romance novel. Harold's blood pressure medication sat unopened on the bathroom counter, a detail that would later trouble the investigators. Harold never missed his evening dose. By 10 p.m., the ship's security team had initiated a Level 1 search protocol. The Whitmans' photos were distributed to all crew members, and a deck-by-deck sweep began immediately. The ship's casino, restaurants, lounges, and entertainment venues were systematically checked. Announcements over the public address system requested that Harold and Margaret Whitman contact guest services immediately. The other passengers, initially unaware of any crisis, began to sense something amiss as uniformed security officers moved with increasing urgency through the corridors. Chief Security Officer David Martinez had overseen dozens of missing passenger incidents during his 15 years at sea, but something about the Whitman case felt different from the start. Most missing passengers were eventually found in unexpected locations, passed out in a maintenance area after too much alcohol, locked in a bathroom they couldn't figure out how to exit, or simply sleeping so deeply in a friend's cabin that they couldn't hear the announcements. But Harold and Margaret Whitman seemed to have genuinely vanished. The initial search expanded to every accessible area of the massive ship. Security teams used master keys to check locked areas while crew members searched service corridors, storage rooms, and mechanical spaces. The ship's medical center was contacted. No patients matching their description had been treated. The guest relations desk confirmed they hadn't changed dining reservations or requested new cabin assignments. Even the ship's casino, where many elderly passengers spent considerable time, showed no record of the Whitmans using their cruise cards after breakfast that morning. By midnight, with the ship now experiencing 20-foot swells, Captain Rodriguez made the decision to reverse course and begin a coordinated search pattern. The Coast Guard was notified, and emergency beacon signals were activated. Professional search and rescue protocols demanded systematic coverage of the area where the couple was last known to be aboard. As the Celestial Dream traced wide circles through increasingly violent seas, her searchlights swept across waves that could easily hide any trace of human presence. The ocean, ancient and indifferent, offered no answers to the desperate questions being shouted into the storm. The Coast Guard cutter Resolute arrived at dawn, her crew grimly familiar with search and rescue operations in these treacherous waters. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen reviewed the timeline with Captain Rodriguez while helicopters launched from the ship's coordinated position. The mathematics of ocean search and rescue were brutally simple. Every hour reduced the probability of finding survivors, and the Whitmans had now been missing for over 12 hours in deteriorating conditions. Aboard the cruise ship, FBI Special Agent Thomas Blake began interviewing passengers and crew. The Whitmans' dinner companions from the previous evening painted a picture of a devoted couple enjoying their anniversary celebration. No arguments, no signs of distress, no indication of depression or marital problems. Harold had been excited about trying the ship's rock climbing wall, while Margaret had signed up for a cooking demonstration. They'd planned to attend that evening's Broadway-style show featuring songs from classic musicals. The most puzzling aspect emerged during interviews with the housekeeping staff. Miguel, their cabin steward, insisted the balcony door had been properly secured when he serviced the room that morning. Yet it was found slightly open during the evening check. Security footage from the corridor showed no one entering or leaving their suite after the Whitmans' departure that morning. The ship's computerized keycard system registered no access to their cabin after 10:15 a.m., when Harold had returned briefly, presumably to retrieve his camera equipment, which was also missing. As the search entered its second day with no signs of the missing couple, investigators began constructing theories about their disappearance. The most obvious explanation, that they had somehow fallen from their balcony during the rough weather, seemed contradicted by several factors. Both Harold and Margaret were described as cautious individuals who took safety seriously. Harold's engineering background made him acutely aware of risks, and Margaret had expressed nervousness about the ship's railings during their embarkation day safety drill. The timing troubled investigators most. Security cameras showed the Whitmans leaving their suite at 10:47 a.m., yet the balcony door was found open hours later with no record of their return. Had they come back to the cabin through some unmonitored route? Had someone else opened that door? The ship's design made it nearly impossible to access balconies from adjacent suites, and the drop to the ocean from Deck 12 was over 150 feet, unsurvivable even in calm conditions. Agent Blake's interviews revealed that several passengers had heard unusual sounds from the vicinity of the Whitman suite around midday, what one described as furniture being moved and another characterized as raised voices. However, the ship's constant motion and the groaning of the hull in rough seas made such reports unreliable. The elderly passenger in the adjacent suite had taken a sleeping pill and heard nothing unusual. The mystery deepened with each interview, creating more questions than answers about what had happened to Harold and Margaret Whitman during those crucial missing hours. After 72 hours of intensive searching covering over 2,000 square miles of Caribbean waters, the Coast Guard officially suspended active rescue operations. The Celestial Dream limped back to Fort Lauderdale under gray skies, her festive atmosphere replaced by an pall of shock and confusion. Passengers who had begun the cruise celebrating anniversaries and birthdays now found themselves reluctant witnesses to an unsolved tragedy that would haunt them for years to come. Rebecca Whitman arrived at the port before the ship docked, her face etched with the particular anguish of a daughter whose parents had simply vanished from existence. The FBI had prepared her for the likelihood that Harold and Margaret would not be returning home, but the finality of an empty cabin still struck her like a physical blow. Their possessions, carefully packed suitcases, Margaret's jewelry, Harold's technical books, seemed to wait patiently for owners who would never reclaim them. The media descended on the story with predictable intensity. Elderly couple vanishes on anniversary cruise dominated headlines for a week, spawning dozens of theories and armchair detective investigations. Some suggested foul play, others pointed to the notorious dangers of cruise ship balconies, and a few conspiracy theorists proposed elaborate cover-ups. But as news cycles moved on to fresh tragedies, the case of Harold and Margaret Whitman gradually faded from public attention, leaving behind only their daughter's unwavering determination to find answers and the Coast Guard's officially open but practically dormant investigation file. 3 years passed with agonizing slowness for Rebecca Whitman Torres, who had hyphenated her name after marriage but now felt the weight of preserving her parents' memory in that simple addition. She had hired 2 private investigators, convinced a television documentary crew to feature the case, and personally contacted every passenger who had been aboard the Celestial Dream during that fateful voyage. The responses ranged from genuine sympathy to uncomfortable silence, but none provided the breakthrough she desperately sought. The cruise line had settled her wrongful death lawsuit out of court, though the agreement included no admission of liability. The money meant nothing to Rebecca. She would have gladly returned every penny for 5 minutes with her parents, for answers, for closure. Instead, she used the settlement to fund her own investigation, hiring retired FBI agents and maritime safety experts to review every piece of evidence. Their conclusion remained frustratingly consistent. Harold and Margaret Whitman had most likely gone overboard during the rough weather, though the exact circumstances remained unexplainable. Detective Lisa Morrison of the Broward County Sheriff's Office kept the file active on her desk, reviewing it monthly despite having no new leads to pursue. She had interviewed Rebecca dozens of times, watching a vibrant woman slowly consume herself with unanswered questions. The case haunted Morrison professionally. In her 15 years of investigative work, she had never encountered such a complete absence of evidence. It was as if Harold and Margaret Whitman had been erased from reality, leaving behind only the growing hole in their daughter's heart and a stack of reports that led nowhere. Captain Jesus Morales had been fishing these waters off the Florida Keys for 37 years, long enough to read the ocean's moods like a familiar book. At 54, he still rose before dawn to prepare his charter boat Maria Elena for another day of guiding tourists toward their dream catches. This particular Tuesday promised ideal conditions: calm seas, light winds, and a weather front that had pushed baitfish into the deeper channels where snapper and grouper congregated. His clients were a family from Ohio celebrating a reunion vacation. 3 generations crowded aboard his 36-foot vessel with more enthusiasm than fishing experience. Captain Morales didn't mind. He had learned long ago that the joy was in the experience, not necessarily the expertise. He positioned the boat over his favorite ledge in 180 feet of water, where the Gulf Stream's edge created an underwater oasis teeming with marine life. The morning progressed typically until young Tommy Patterson, age 12 and determined to catch something bigger than his grandfather, felt his line go heavy in an unusual way. "Captain, I think I'm stuck on the bottom," he called out, his rod bent double with the weight of something substantial. Captain Morales moved to assist, recognizing immediately that this wasn't the typical snag on coral or rock. Whatever Tommy had hooked felt different, heavy but yielding, like something that had been resting on the sandy bottom for a very long time. Captain Morales engaged the boat's electric reel, slowly winching up whatever Tommy had inadvertently snagged. At 120 feet, he caught the first glimpse of something metallic glinting in the clear water, too regular and manufactured to be natural debris. As it rose higher, the object's shape became more distinct, a barnacle-encrusted camera housing, the kind used by serious underwater photographers, trailing what appeared to be a wrist strap that had somehow wrapped around Tommy's fishing line. "What is it, Captain?" asked Tommy's father, leaning over the gunwale as the strange catch broke the surface. Captain Morales carefully lifted the corroded device aboard, his experienced eye immediately recognizing it as expensive equipment that had spent considerable time underwater. The camera housing was split along one seam, probably from pressure changes, but the titanium construction had protected most of the internal components from complete destruction. Inside the waterproof case, nestled in foam padding that had somehow remained intact, was a digital camera and what appeared to be a small memory card still sealed in its slot. Captain Morales had pulled up plenty of odd items during his decades of fishing: anchors, bottles, even a motorcycle once, but something about this discovery felt significant. The care taken to waterproof the camera, the expensive housing, the fact that it had been found in deep water far from any popular diving spots all suggested this wasn't simply lost equipment. As Captain Morales examined the camera housing more closely, something else caught his attention. Tangled in the wrist strap, partially hidden by marine growth, was a gold band that definitely wasn't part of the camera equipment. Using his tackle knife, he carefully freed what was unmistakably a wedding ring, its surface dulled by salt water and time but still clearly engraved with something on the inner band. Tommy's grandfather, a retired jeweler named Frank Patterson, took the ring in his weathered hands and squinted at the inscription. Years of examining fine details had left him with an eye for craftsmanship, and this was quality work: 14-karat gold, classic men's wedding band, probably 40 or 50 years old based on the style. He held it up to catch the morning sunlight streaming across the boat's deck. HW and MW, forever yours, June 15, 1980, Frank read aloud, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet boat. Captain Morales felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. In his decades of fishing these waters, he had developed an instinct for when something was important, and every nerve in his body was now telling him that this was no ordinary find. The combination of expensive camera equipment and a wedding ring, found together in deep water, suggested a story that someone needed to hear. Back at the marina, Captain Morales made the decision that would change everything. While his passengers excitedly discussed their unusual catch over lunch, he researched missing persons databases on his phone, searching for anyone with the initials HW and MW who might have vanished in these waters. The search led him through dozens of cases, but one entry made him stop scrolling: Harold and Margaret Whitman, missing since their anniversary cruise 3 years earlier. The Coast Guard station in Key West connected him with Detective Lisa Morrison, whose voice sharpened with interest when he described the camera and ring. "Don't touch anything else," she instructed. "I'm driving down there myself." Morrison had thought about the Whitman case just that morning during her monthly file review, wondering if she would ever find any trace of the missing couple. Now, staring at her computer screen, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with unexpected breakthroughs. Rebecca Whitman-Torres was teaching her third-grade class when her phone rang with Detective Morrison's call. 3 years of false leads and dead ends had taught her to temper her hopes, but something in Morrison's voice was different this time. "We may have found something belonging to your parents," the detective said carefully. "I need you to come to Key West to make an identification. And Rebecca, you might want to bring someone with you for support." The FBI's Digital Forensics Laboratory in Miami had seen countless damaged storage devices, but the memory card from Harold Whitman's camera presented unique challenges. 3 years of saltwater exposure had corroded the external contacts, while pressure changes had caused microfractures in the internal circuitry. Senior technician Amanda Chen approached the recovery process with the patience of someone who understood that this small piece of silicon might hold the answers to a family's 3-year nightmare. Using specialized equipment designed for recovering data from damaged media, Chen carefully extracted the card's memory chips and began the painstaking process of reconstruction. The first attempts yielded only corrupted data fragments, bits of color information and metadata that proved the card had indeed contained digital photographs. After 6 hours of methodical work, she achieved her first breakthrough, a partially recoverable image file that showed enough detail to confirm it had been taken aboard a cruise ship. Rebecca sat in the FBI field office conference room, Detective Morrison beside her, as Chen prepared to show them what had been recovered. "I need to warn you," Chen said gently, "some of these images may be difficult to see. The final photos on the card appear to have been taken under distressing circumstances." Rebecca's hand found Morrison's arm, steadying herself for whatever revelation awaited. After 3 years of questions, she was finally going to learn what had happened to Harold and Margaret Whitman during their final hours. The recovered photographs told a story that no one could have imagined. The first images showed Harold and Margaret's final morning aboard the ship, breakfast on their balcony, Margaret laughing at something Harold had said, both of them bundling up against the cold wind. The timestamp showed 9:23 a.m., just over an hour before their last confirmed sighting on the security cameras. Harold's engineer's mind had apparently driven him to document everything, even in their final moments. The sequence continued with photos of their suite's interior, showing signs of hasty packing that hadn't been mentioned in any previous investigation. Suitcases were open on the bed, clothes scattered as if they had been preparing to leave quickly. One image captured Margaret at the balcony door, her face turned toward the camera with an expression of concern that would haunt Rebecca forever. The timestamp read 10:15 a.m., the same time Harold's key card had registered its final access to their cabin. The final photograph, taken at 10:31 a.m. according to the metadata, showed the cabin from Harold's perspective as he apparently fell backward, the camera capturing a tilted view of the ceiling and balcony door. But it was the partial figure visible at the edge of the frame that made Detective Morrison immediately call for backup units. After 3 years of investigating the Whitmans' disappearance as a tragic accident, she now had photographic evidence of something far more sinister, evidence that would reopen the case as a double homicide and launch the largest maritime criminal investigation in Coast Guard history. Rebecca stared at the final image on the screen, her parents' last moment frozen in digital memory. The truth she had sought for 3 years was more terrible than any scenario she had imagined, but it was finally, devastatingly real. Harold and Margaret Whitman hadn't simply vanished, they had been murdered, and their killer had walked free for 3 years, believing the ocean had buried their crime forever. Now, thanks to a 12-year-old boy's fishing line and the eternal love between two people who had promised to be forever each other's, justice could finally begin. 6 months after the discovery of Harold's camera, FBI Special Agent Thomas Blake stood in a federal courtroom watching Miguel Vasquez, former cabin steward aboard the Celestial Dream, receive a life sentence for the murders of Harold and Margaret Whitman. The partial figure captured in Harold's final photograph had been enough to launch the investigation that ultimately unraveled a web of theft, blackmail, and murder that had plagued the cruise industry for years. The enhanced digital analysis had revealed Miguel's distinctive tattoo on his left forearm, a small anchor that he'd tried unsuccessfully to have removed after the murders. Security footage, previously overlooked, showed him using his master key to enter the Whitman suite multiple times during the morning they disappeared. The couple had apparently discovered Miguel stealing from passenger cabins, photographing his face and gathering evidence of his crimes. Desperate to avoid deportation and prison, Miguel had confronted them on their balcony. What Miguel hadn't counted on was Harold's engineer instincts. Even as the cabin steward forced them toward the balcony railing, Harold had continued photographing, his final act one of defiance and love, ensuring that if they couldn't survive to seek justice, their camera would speak for them. The ocean that Miguel believed would hide his crime forever had instead preserved the evidence that would destroy him. Rebecca watched from the gallery as Miguel was led away in shackles, his face showing no remorse for the elderly couple whose only crime had been celebrating their anniversary in the wrong cabin at the wrong time. The man who had served them breakfast and cleaned their room had ultimately stolen not just their belongings, but their lives and 3 years of their daughter's peace. As she left the courthouse, Rebecca clutched the small waterproof case that now held her parents' camera, returned to her after serving as evidence. Inside was their final gift to her, the truth, preserved beneath the waves by love that death could not silence. Miguel Vasquez would spend the rest of his life in prison, but Harold and Margaret Whitman had won their final victory from the depths of the sea. What secrets are hidden in your family's past? What truths lie waiting to be discovered? The Whitman case proves that love transcends death, and truth always finds a way to surface. Sometimes justice takes years, sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places, but it never truly dies. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes in the power of love and the inevitability of justice. Because somewhere out there, another family is searching for answers, and another truth is waiting to be found. Subscribe for more incredible true crime mysteries where love conquers all and justice prevails against impossible odds.